welcome everyone. Welcome. G'day, Mary. How are you going today?
Going well, Brooke. Nice to speak with you.
I'll just let the people know this is Mary Rodwell, people. She's the founder and principal of the Australian Close Encounters Resources Network, ACERN, and co-founder of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. Former nurse, midwife, counsellor, hypnotherapist, Reiki master, international speaker and researcher. And she's also author of Awakenings, How Extraterrestrial Contacts Can Transform Life, and The New Human, Awakenings of Our Cosmic Heritage. And that's the short one, isn't it?
That's the short
I got a big one here. 10-page document. Mary, so how did you get started in all this?
Well, the short version is that I've been, I think, all my life anyway, interested in and looking at and spirituality. I was brought up in a conventional religion and whatever, but what always fascinated me was human experience. And even as a nurse and a midwife, you're very interested in people because you're there as a healer. And the bottom line was that I was always fascinated with, the soul journey, really. And what was the problem with my conventional religion? It didn't allow for reincarnation. And I came across this thinking, this makes a lot more sense than just having one life and then you're dead. It never quite made, a lot of sense to me. So exploring all this and working, finally, I was asked to learn to be a counsellor, and I worked in a medical practice. And I kept looking at what was behind illness, which is emotional, psychological, spiritual traumas often that create a lot of illness. And I preferred prevention rather than cure. But getting back to how it got me finally into what I'm doing now was I started to open up myself, more multidimensionally. I explored hypnosis. And I found what was fascinating about hypnosis is you can take somebody into what they believe to be a past life, and they explain what that was like. They would explain coming through the death sequence and being aware of spirits around them and talking about that life and what they learned in that life. And this really consolidated my interest in all the soul journey side of things. But it wasn't till a lovely gentleman walked through the door. He's a good friend of mine now. We've known each other since he walked in. He said, "Mary, I've heard you're open-minded for this." He said, "There are no support groups for this. They just think you're crazy." His name's Ellis Taylor. He's an author in his own right now and lives in England. And he said to me, it's not just me waking up with marks on the body and shaved areas. He said, my family's all experiencing this as well. So, when you've got a family affair, that is very compelling, even if you don't want to believe the actual person. Fortunately, as luck would have it, and some would say synchronicity, I'd read a book by Dr. John Mack, a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University. He wrote the book Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, and also Communion with Whitley Strieber. So I had the experiencer story, and I had, this was a psychiatrist, a professor of psychiatry, saying he believed them. So with that, and with Ellis's story, and again, to cut a long story short, that was the start. Within 2 weeks, another person walked through the door who were having similar kinds of experiences. Then I met a social worker that was having experiences, and we started the Perth first abduction support group all those years ago. That opened up more and more, and I then felt really strongly that I needed to create something that was a place where people could come and have therapeutic support, because so many of them, and you'll know this too, Brooke, is you meet many experiences. Who do you go to? If you go to a clinical psychologist that's not open to this, they're just going to think you're crazy. You go to a psychiatrist and you're definitely, in most cases, going to be thought of as crazy. So, what do you do? Where do you go? And that was the reason why I created ACERN, because I wanted it to be, I'd been professionally counseling that by then a good 10 years. You know, I knew my skills. And on top of that, what was so useful was the hypnosis, because you know that part of this is when you have experiences where you have missing time. And for those that don't know what that is, it means that somebody can be traveling, for example, in a car, see some strange lights. They should arrive at their destination at a certain time, and they find they're an hour late or 2 hours late or 3 hours late, and they can't explain it. So with hypnosis, you can actually find out what happened in that missing time. So my hypnosis is really useful, not just for that, but for other experiences where people have a contact, where they can find out what happened on the craft. They can find out, you know, the kinds of things that have occurred with different beings. So it gives them something to work with, rather than, I know something happened, but I don't know what it is. So for me, that's been really useful to help people understand more of their experiences. So in terms of what does that mean, it means that now I'm really deeply down the rabbit hole with 3,500 cases behind me. And it just seems to grow and grow and grow.
So well, it makes sense, because if people just go to, if they don't go to the psychiatrist, they just go to somewhere that just says, okay, what happened, and they write it down and document it, and that's pretty much it. In the old days, that's all that'd be available to them.
Well, the thing was, a lot of UFO groups, the problem is that they would, you know, they'd go because they're interested in the whole field. They may have had experiences. They may have seen craft with, you know, or whatever, but not many in that group may have the skills to support someone who'd had experiences. And initially they'd go to UFO groups, they'd hear all about the sightings, but nobody wanted to know or deal with people who'd had the actual experiences, because it was all too strange, too and scary for a lot of people, because they're scared, you know, they don't know what happened or why, what is it all about, why them, those things. And there was no one in the group that would perhaps have, as I say, those therapeutic skills. You might have someone who's good at hypnosis, and the problem with that was they take them and they, you know, help them remember something. But if you haven't got the skills to help them work through that experience, then they're even more traumatized at the end of the day, because, you know, all you've opened this can of worms, and they're saying, well, what happened? Whereas if you understand what to ask, and that's the crucial thing, it isn't just about, well, I can see the inside of a craft and I can see this, this, and this. You want to know what happened, why, and what's your interaction with those beings. And those are the kinds of questions not necessarily asked, because they're more interested in, oh, yeah, you were on a craft, you know what it looks like, off you go. And then stupidly left in this bigger puzzle. You know, without, but why? Why me? What's it all about? What were they doing? Why were they doing it? But if you take that to that next level and ask those questions, they can get those answers in that trance state. They can actually find those things out, so they can come out with a whole new way of understanding themselves and their interaction with what those.
So by getting a sort of like a holistic or ancient sort of healing process and taking to the root cause, you can dig deeper and find out exactly why those people are going.
Well, they can ask the questions in trance. And what people don't realize with the Dr. Edgar Free Foundation research was, what we discovered was, with the 4,300 people we surveyed, and what people don't realize is it isn't just about, you know, taking DNA and whatever. 50% of those 4,300 people had healings on board craft. 50%. We also found out that out of that number, that in terms of interactions, and this is where it gets difficult for conventional nuts and bolts ufologists, is 75% of their interactions were out of body, not physical. So you explain that, and because people don't realize that, and that's what I think has been really hard for standard ufology, is there isn't enough tangibility for them to actually deal with it in that way. Because what talking about here, Brooke, is consciousness.
Yes, consciousness.
And that's a whole new ball game, because how do we understand human consciousness? And this is why it has shifted, and why my work particularly has shifted from, not just the nuts and bolts, but the spiritual aspect, because as we've discovered, is many of those that have experiences are connected to the beings that are they're having encounters with in some way or another.
Well, that's it with the whole consciousness. I mean, to bring those two together would just be a thing to go. But so you were talking. I was looking at some of the overline of your book, but I heard you talking about when 50% of the people are getting healings. Is it anything in specific, or is it just across the whole board?
Well, it can be right across the board, and I don't know how controversial your podcast is.
Say what you want.
Right. Well, let me tell you two interesting stories that have surfaced in the last year. One was a lady healer in England. She wrote to me and said, "I've never had anything to do with aliens or anything like that," she said, and this has freaked me out. She had been asked to heal a woman who had that thing called a jab, and she was quite sick, and the woman was trying to heal her with her energy work and what have you. And she said, "Mary, I couldn't get to whatever was there. Something was stopping me, something in this woman. She said, and I just couldn't do the healing." And she said, and out of nowhere came this being, this alien, she said. And this being took me and the woman I was trying to heal up onto the spacecraft. They did something with her to heal her. And I saw it. And she said, and then they put us back. And within 3 days, that woman was well. And she said, but I've never had anything to do with aliens before, she said, and it scared the living daylights out of me. And she said, have you ever heard of anything like that before? And I said, no. But within a week, another lady from Australia who was a businesswoman had to have the drug. And she said that within a few days of having it, 3 beings came into her room. They were all working on her body. She said, and I said, what do you think they were doing? She said, I think they were healing me. So there's 2 cases of ETs stepping in after someone having to take this particular thing we all know about. And I found that really interesting, that you're asking specifics of healing. Well, it seems like some ET beings are not agreeing with the mandate down here on this planet right now.
And usually what you get is just a small percentage of what's really happening out there, because most people don't talk, do they, about stuff? They just like keep hush hush.
Well, it's coming out a lot more, and I don't know. I mean, the Pentagon papers and all that rubbish that they're coming out with, they're actually disclosing there's bright lights in the sky and they don't know where they're from, which is just a hoot, really, for anyone in the field, knowing full well last 80 or 90 years they know exactly where they're from, and they've got the technology to prove it. So it really you just laugh at the whole nonsense of it, So what I say is that I believe that disclosure is going to come from the ground up, and more people are actually writing their stories now, and about the whole range of things they've experienced, and it's becoming almost commonplace for people to say, I'm going to write a book about this or whatever. And what we're finding is, the enormous credibility behind many of these people with experiences as well, because you know what it's like on this planet, unless you've got, a piece of paper to say that you're worth listening to, nobody listens to you. So it has to be someone with those letters after their name or whatever. But more and more are being pushed to tell their stories. And that's really opening other people up that said, I would never have spoken about this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but I feel I have to now. Almost this urge, this absolute, this energy of I have to speak my truth now. I really have to do this. And that's what I'm finding now, is more and more people are feeling that. So we're heading for something really, I think, quite spectacular in the near future, I suspect.
Well, yeah, well, I've just noticed, if you call it the Great Awakening or whatever, I've noticed people have just been more and more open, and people are just starting to more and more questioning. And they're going about their normal. Even the people that you would say are asleep, they're still asking questions. If they like it or not, they're still going, what's up with this? What's up with that? That doesn't make any sense. And you just sort of, well, you start to ask the right questions now. But you were positive, negative aliens. I mean, they're pretty much. I mean, it's all the same, isn't it? The same as people.
Well, it's a really good question, because so many, have different ideas on who's good and who's bad and all those in between. My understanding is, for the majority, the experience ultimately has been absolutely positive and benevolent. Because out of our 4,300, ultimately 85% had a psycho-spiritual transformation, which means that, most of them are positive, because you wouldn't get that otherwise. You'd get everybody in fear and what have you. What I do find is a lot of people judge these intelligences initially through fear, because they don't know who they are, what they're doing. They don't know what it's going to mean, all those kinds of. So once they get to understand it, and I know you've interviewed Peter and James and whatever. I mean, there's always that initial apprehension until you get a sense of what's actually going on. I do think there are some that are self-serving, and that's because we're in a duality. And I think that's all part of being in a duality, is that you've got to have dark and light and whatever. But I do also think that, we can't put all a particular species in a box and say they're all bad and these ones are all good, because I've heard reports of, and I know reptilians have got a bad rap most of the time, but there have been people that have had loving experiences with the reptilians. So it doesn't mean they're all in the same track. My understanding is every species is being hit by these frequencies now, which is an activation and awakening their more spiritual selves. And I think this is going through animals, and everything is now being affected by those frequencies. So, we're all doing the same thing. We're all souls wanting to go to a higher realm of awareness and understanding, no matter what form we've chosen to incarnate in this time. That's how I see it.
Well, it's just evolution, I guess.
That's right.
So, what about like with, say, free wills? You believe that some of these people that have contacts with aliens, that they would be old family for them as we've incarnated?
Well, one of the interesting things is, for those that are still uncertain about, why they're having the interactions and whatever, when you get them in a trance state and you're getting their subconscious, superconscious to have a dialogue with whatever these intelligence, one of the questions I always ask is, have you on any level consented to this experience? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yes, but before I came here. So it's a soul agreement on some level, but many of them also connect to the intelligences that they're having encounters with. They may say, I feel like I'm connected to the Pleiadians or the Arcturians, or I come from Andromeda or whatever. So when some people say to me, well, why aren't the aliens helping, or the ETs helping us on this planet, for example, if they're so benevolent? And I'm saying that they're incarnating in human form from many of those places out in the galaxy to help this planet right now. And I'm getting the children who will say this, when you've got a 10-year-old telling you that before they came here, they were a blue being. This is their first incarnation, and that their job this time is to help the planet with its pollution. That's their mission. And they already are coming in knowing that they've got a job to do
Wow.
here, you know. And that's just one out of so many I've come across that are aware of this, you know. And this is what's so fascinating is, unless, you know, until they may get shut down, some do get shut down. We know that through the educational system, by judgment, by culture, by all those things. But if they can retain that, they also retain their communication with the various intelligences that are sometimes family. I always remember this 8-year-old that came to my office, and he said his family were the mantis beings, and that when he dies, he's going back to being a mantis. So he didn't relate to being human, he related to being a mantis being, you know. And this is how they talk. This is my family, this is my ancestors, you know. It's, and you know, when people say, do they watch too much television or what? You don't get this on the telly, you know. You just don't. You know, this is unique to somebody's experience, you know.
Yeah, I mean, they're the Genesis, aren't they? The Master Genesis, the mantis beings. They're big on genetics.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The mantis beings, are they the ones that are big on genetics?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. They're the master geneticists.
Yeah.
And many of the indigenous know about these different beings. You know, they're called the Mamu in South Africa. They talk about them teaching them and showing them how to operate and all sorts of the sacred sites. Certainly here in Australia, you know, the indigenous talk about, you know, the Wandjina, showing them where sacred sites were, where the water was, and teaching them all sorts of things. And it's in generally what we're hearing is most of these star beings that they connect to all across the world in different cultures have, for the most part, been seen as benevolent and connected to us.
Alien human hybrids. What do you know on that subject?
That's the buzzword now, isn't it? All the hybrids and whatever. Well, I start with this one, Brooke, and I say, look, we're all hybrids for a start, because, you know, they've got this, the hybrids are going to come and take over the planet and la, 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 la. And I'm saying, well, actually, we're all hybrids and we have taken over the planet already. So what's the problem? Well, it's true. If you look at our genetics, we have been intelligently designed, and even Francis Crick talked about that. You know, co-founder of the DNA molecule was actually saying exactly that. We're supposed to have at least 12 different species in our genes. And what's happening now, though, are the ones that are relating to being hybrids. Often we'll talk about maybe mum being taken up on board craft and had an extra addition to certain DNA from a particular species, so that the person relates to being maybe Pleiadian or Arcturian or whatever, because that part of them is activated, or there's more of it. But we've got all of it in our genes anyway. Every one of us has got that. And with this awakening, what's happening is a lot of that is being activated. So we're now connecting to more of our star ancestors, and saying, oh, you know, I've got this feeling I'm from Orion or Sirius or whatever it is. It's a part of their DNA that's being activated. But the ones that are identifying with being hybrids have got, it seems like they may have more of that DNA because they're coming in too with a lot more awareness, their connection stronger, and they're saying that they're coming in with the skills from all over the place to help this planet as it shifts and changes into a higher frequency and a higher consciousness.
Now, what do you know about that frequency shift, the higher consciousness?
Well, we're experiencing it for sure, because I've noticed in the 25 years I've been in this field, whereas, you know, people are really getting it now. Whereas if I talked like this even 5 years ago, it would have been much harder for people to understand what's going on. But it's like there's been a switch pulled with a lot of people, going from conventional everyday life, materialistic values, just looking for the second car and the bigger house or whatever it is, to losing total interest in all that materialism, looking at rural lifestyles, changing their diet, changing the way they're educating their kids, and a completely new way of understanding their connection to everything. I mean, I'll give you an example of something. I did a session with a veterinary surgeon in Chile last year. She's written to me and said now she's communicating with the animals so she can tell their owners what's going on with them. But not only the ones that are still alive, she said, she's communicating with the pets that have died and want to say something to their pet owners. So here is someone who's talking about, this is a veterinary surgeon that's saying, I can tell you what your pet's thinking, what your pet wants to say to you. And if they've died, I can still do it. And talking to, and so this communication with animals is becoming really strong with so many people being able to do it, and the children are able to do it. But not only that, but with plants. There's a kind of communication with plants, for example. I mean, it's like somehow we've expanded the frequencies that we can work with to understand more of of what's going on around us in terms of that kind of connectedness to everything, even crystals and other, it's expanded, and I'm talking to families where they're all doing it. I mean, it's not just one person, it'll be all of them. I
got a friend that talks to crystals, and they get really ticked off when one of their good crystals says, I want you to take me up in the hills and bury me. I want to go back in the ground. And she's like, no. But she talks to them all the time. So when we're getting these DNA upgrades, is that just the whole broad? Is it because you're talking about the extra senses, like telekinesis and telepathy and all that?
Well, Brooke, the way I understand it is we have them, but they've been dormant.
Yep.
So, they talk about the junk DNA, they can't explain what it's for and all the rest of it. We're only using 5 to 10% of our DNA that's activated, and what's the 90% for? I believe that's what's being activated, especially the ET side with all the abilities and awareness. And as we become, spiritually awake, we start to activate where that is being activated. And the more you open up to it, the more happens. It's like anything, the more you start using that awareness, the more it expands and continues to expand. So many of those that are coming to me are starting to see orbs, starting to see energy fields, starting to see spirits or energy forms or whatever, or starting to get downloads and starting to get, more and more insights and what have you. So the next step is, okay, so how do I work with that so that I can, have confidence in it? And so, my work along with others is to say, well, this is how you operate the new operating system. This is how it works. So, so that they can start to have confidence in the information that's coming in. And it doesn't always come in a verbal way. It may be a knowing, a sensing, a feeling. All of those things are the ways we operate multidimensionally. And this is what's a lot of seeking now, is a way of bringing that all together in a way that they can utilize it in the same way as they're using the left brain, their logical side, so that it is in a kind of operating in harmony with our 3D self that's operating in the 3D reality. And it's really, that's what's happening now more and more. And so they're talking to the beings. And I mean, this is all the prep for us being totally telepathic, because when we join the galactic community, that's what they want. They want us to be equal partners in that, and it will be telepathy because it's a more efficient way of communicating.
Yeah, instead of learning everyone's language.
Yeah.
I've been reading up on Indigenous healers in Australia, and people don't realise that they've been talking in telepathically. They do out in the remotes, and they've been doing it for years. They've been doing it since you died. and people just don't realize what the human's capable of.
Well, the problem has been for the last several hundred years, anything to do with the intuitive side has been derided, mocked, and people are told that it's rubbish and all the rest of it in the Western world. And our modern psychology model is exactly that. It just says the only things you can trust are your five senses, which is rubbish, because of course we're in our five senses. We have a spirit that inhabits the physical, and the way that spirit communicates is multidimensionally, because we are multidimensional beings. But all of that has been mocked, derided, or treated with suspicion, and you end up in a particular hospital facility if you start saying, well, you're having communication with something or other. Just even mentioning that, I mean, clairvoyants and mediums for God knows how many years have been mocked and laughed at as these woo woo things and what have you. And so people have been very reluctant to own that they, when they were at the funeral, they saw Granny standing by a coffin, or and she spoke to them or something, because immediately everybody goes, oh, there's definitely something wrong with you, isn't there, or whatever. And that's been programmed into us so heavily that people are so reluctant to mention anything to do with that because of the way they get judged.
So with that judgment you were talking about, we know that they try to get that out of us. They start at an early age at school. Are you finding that more people are trying, if they've got kids with those abilities, you think they're trying, best thing to do is to keep them out of school and homeschool?
Well, that's a good question, Brooke. And I think that it's certainly been something I've been asked, particularly since I wrote The New Human, where I'm talking about the new levels of human and generations that are often diagnosed with ADHD or dyslexia or Asperger's or whatever. What is happening is that they're considered dysfunctional, whereas the parents, if they've had experiences, know that it's real experiences. So they're saying, what can I do to assist them? And for many, if they can, they're looking at homeschooling. Some send them to, schools like Steiner, which at least is open to this a little bit. They're looking at alternative schools that are honoring the creative, intuitive side. But, ultimately, the school system is archaic. What we do and how we program
absolutely
is totally archaic. And these new kids are coming in. I remember a 13-year-old saying to me, Mary, she said, when I'm listening to my teacher, the trouble is she's saying one thing and she's thinking something else. And often what she's thinking isn't very nice. So you've got kids that are telepathic, that are tuning into the teachers and thinking, isn't so good, And this is what the teachers don't realize, is these kids can suss them and suss out integrity like that.
They'll put that if that kid says anything, that's straight in the hallway. Let it to your parents. Do you find that, say, like when you're talking about Asperger's and autism, because there's certain senses that they struggle with in our realm, but is there other heightened senses that they might be experiencing, you found?
With that, Dr. Alina Olsson, who's a molecular biologist in Sweden, who's a good friend of mine, she calls them letter people because, ADHD, the letters. And she said she was part ADHD, part Asperger's, etc. She said, I tested first my physical senses. And she said, and the new kids have 5 times more sensitivity to touch. The sense of smell is enhanced. Hearing is enhanced. That what they can see in the visual spectrum is enhanced. So all of that is expanded. That's why they struggle dealing with noise and loud noises and, don't want to always be with lots of people. So that's what they're dealing with, the physical side. But on top of that, they're multidimensionally tuning in, picking up thoughts, picking up energy. picking up, seeing energy fields or orbs of light. So they're seeing all of this and experiencing all of this, and it's not understood. So what a lot of them do is they close down to survive.
Yeah.
And then they're seen as, oh, you know, they've got problems with socializing, or they've got problems with humanity, the way humanity is, because of the way that we, you know, so many are very aggressive. We're a very aggressive species. And they're coming in with all this heightened awareness, and they can tell when you're lying or when you're speaking the truth. I always remember a 7-year-old telling me he could tell when someone was lying and telling the truth. And I said, so what does that feel like? And he said, well, if someone's lying, I go all cold, he said. And when they tell the truth, I feel warm. And this is how the 7-year-old was able to know the difference. The trouble is that in mainstream, none of this is known about. They just think that, you know, the kid's withdrawing because it's extra shy or whatever. Their heightened sensitivity makes it really hard when they're around, you know, a lot of disruption or a lot of aggression or negativity. Yeah. They feel it.
Well, I can imagine it's traumatic for just a normal person sometimes going through school, and to have to go through school with all those heightened senses, it would it'd be absolutely horrific.
Yeah. And that's why being at home and being educated at home, if possible, for them is obviously more ideal. Unfortunately, not every parent can do this. So you've got, you know, I've always said there needs to be a whole new educational system for these upgrades of human, where they are encouraged and supported with their awareness so that they can, you know, utilize this awareness in the way that they're meant to and support it, while we make sure they eat the right foods and they're protected and they're in the right environment to do that.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately they will tell us what they need to come, you know, to do what they've come here to do.
So do you think that how we're getting more kids with all these issues and on the spectrum, do you think that's to do with medical procedures that have happened in the 3D world from us, or is it just shut stuff down and other stuff takes its place, other DNA takes its place?
It's a good question, because, you know, when I mention autism as being part of this new generation of humans, I'm talking about the ones that are born, that are given that diagnosis, not ones that it may have happened due to some medical procedure. There's a big difference.
Okay.
What we're saying is they're wired differently. And the reason that I came to that conclusion was what I was noticing was the intergenerational link of families that have had contact. And you can trace it back to grandparents and beyond. And it might be one or both parents, may only be through the maternal line, it may be through the, you know, the father's line. But what happens is that each generation is an upgrade. And what I was noticing with these families is they would say, oh, my son's been diagnosed as ADHD, or my son's dyslexic, or my daughter's this. And I kept thinking, well, if these intelligences are as they were telling us, and the evidence was that each time there's an upgrade in the human through that genetic line, what's going on? Until I realized they're wired differently, so they're not reprogrammed into the old 3D model, which many of them have had. Harder to program an ADHD. What do? They give them Ritalin to slow them up so they can program them. So they slow them right down so they can be programmed. But the whole idea is not to program them. That program, that 3D that, you know, I grew up with, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, is to shut you down, to tell you only the things that your brain analytical logical side is the only true reality, and everything else is fantasy or imagination or, you know, whatever. For goodness sake, you know, that's all airy stuff. That, you know, I want to listen to that. Because, and what does, you know, education do? It puts you into that box and programs you to literally ignore anything else. And it gets even worse when you go to higher education. It's even more tight, this box. So it's harder for you to break free of that if
Yeah.
you've got that level. And that's why I think they're wired differently, deliberately. So it's harder to program them so they can retain more of their awareness.
Well, it must make it hard because, you know, like from the spiritual side is when you start constricting people and not letting them be what they're meant to be, it just causes so much more problems.
Well, a lot become very depressed because if you're only really thinking your reality is this 3D reality, heaven help us, looking at what's happening at the moment, particularly. But if you can start to make sense of it through your intuition, through your sensing, your knowing, your feeling, and getting a sense of how it's all comes together, then you can say, right, I can understand that now, because this is why I'm experiencing this. This is how I'm being supported. This is what I need to know to manage this 3D reality that I'm in. And so you can start to, you know, join the dots and connect the dots and become whole. When you're like this, where this is all out here somewhere and all you've got is this 3D reality that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, without that, no wonder people become depressed and say, well, is this all there is? You know, I get bored, I go to school, I work my things off for God knows how many years till I'm 60 or 65. And then, you know, if I'm lucky and still I have my health, I might last till I'm 80. And then it's curtains. Oh, that's it. You know?
Yeah, it's very depressing, isn't it?
Doesn't make any sense, does it?
I mean, there has to be more.
Well,
or if that was the case, you would think people would be even far more aggressive to get what they want.
Well, you know, the one thing that made sense to me, and it wasn't part of my religious upbringing, which was reincarnation, because to me, it seemed really crazy that we had this one life, and just as we're getting a handle on how it all works, we die, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, that doesn't make any sense. You know, on any level, that doesn't make any sense. So you just finally working it all out. You get to my advanced years, and then all of a sudden, you know, when you finally worked it out, you're gone. And I just thought, no, it's a nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, you look at things like that and think, if that was the case, we only had one lifetime. You think the whole structure of the education would be different.
Well,
you know exactly. What I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that was where conventional religion let itself down big time for me, was that. And of course, there's, you know, all the other stuff that's supposed to happen once we, you know, I had a bit of a problem with all of that as well, because it didn't quite fit. Didn't make a lot of sense either, you know, and it's part of the journey, I think, on this planet is to actually break free of that. I think part of it is the challenge is to actually look at all of that and say, well, you know, what does make sense to me? And the only thing that starts to make sense is looking at it as a spiritual journey. And then you can say, now I can work that one. I can work it out now. And that was why, you know, it's so important for people to open up to that part of themselves that is connected to you know, greater reality. Whether you call that the source, God, whatever name you want to give it, whatever. And then you think, now I can see the purpose of why I'm experiencing this. And when you've done a lot of hypnosis where you take people between lives, you know, and that you take them through their death of a particular life, and they see themselves as a spirit, and then you say to them, well, what did you learn in that life? And they may say, oh, I learned about limits, or I learned about, you know, compassion, or I learned about, you know, love, or whatever it is. They can tell you what they gained through that life. And then, you know, they'll start talking about when they came into this one, they'll talk about choosing mum and dad and their siblings and what kinds of things they want to experience to grow as a soul. And so, you know, you can then see that we're absolutely in charge of our own journey as a soul. And that to me is such an empowering bit of information, you know, and that made sense to me, because when you know, it's not just one person saying that. When you come, there are so many that have the same experience when they get taken in between lives.
Yeah.
They start to see how it all works in their soul group. And you can take somebody into a past life and you can say, okay, you're sitting, they'll say, I'm sitting around the table with my family in medieval times, for example. And you can say to them, well, look at the person opposite. And they'll say, oh, well, that's my mother in that life. And I'll say, do you recognize them? And 9 times out of the 10, they'll say, my mother in that life is my sister in this one, or is actually my father now, who's my mother in that life. So they actually see the continuity of the soul journey with other souls in a soul family. And you can see them taking it through the incarnation, playing different roles for each other.
I've experienced that myself.
Okay.
It's bizarre.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I was being hung on the gallows as a lady. I could smell the mud and the crap, you know, and then I saw someone come down the stairs and they were really ticked off that I was being hung. They were with the I don't know who they were, the officers or whatever, and it was one of my brothers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my God, there's my brother.
Yeah.
In this life. And I'm just like, my God, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But it makes sense that we as souls choose certain soul families to incarnate and learn from each other. You know, I find that is fascinating, the way that we, you know, look and we'll say, oh, so my mum was my sister that lifetime, or, you know, or whatever. And it changes the way that your attitude to them as well. You know, that there's a different way that you connect to them when you realize that we're souls on the same journey, you know, and we're soul families, and chosen these different roles. And it's much easier to let go of angst and issues and all that kind of stuff when you understand that, because you think this is the role they're playing this time. You know, this is what I'm learning from them and they're learning from me. And things make sense.
They do. I heard of people and they were talking about one of their siblings were just really nasty, and then they've done a past life regression and it says, oh, okay, I know why now. I did that to them. I was a nasty one to them a few lives ago. And it just starts making, you know, going around in a circle. So I guess it's important to be a lot cooler to people.
Well, we're taught about forgiveness as being one of the most important things with those that, you know, around us, and to let that go, because we're the one that is being damaged by that more than anything else. It damages us, you know, when we go around with all this angst over people and what have you, instead of saying, well, what was that? What did I learn from that? What did I gain from that? Because there's always a gain. It's looking for the gain rather than loss. You know, when you'll understand that, what you've experienced.
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, I counsel and I talk to people all the time about, you know, they're going through hard times, and the ones that seem to get through it quicker are the ones that go, okay, there's a lesson in everything. What do I have to learn? What do I have to do with? What do I have to experience? Let's learn the lesson so I don't have to go through it again. And then you get some other people.
Yeah. Sorry, what I was going to say is what I see as free will is your choice in attitude. Are you going to be a victim of that, or are you going to say, well, what is the gold in there that's for me, that I, you know, that I'm learning from that? There's your choice. I can be a victim of my life, or I can choose not to be and learn from everything that is a mirror to me, teaching me something.
Yep. Easy way or the hard way? How much of my life did I choose the hard way? A lot of it.
Yeah.
But it's amazing once you get the tools how everything can change.
Well, it's as we wake up to more of what I see as our soul journey, and we start to connect the dots, then our attitude to everything shifts, and our attitude to everything else around us shifts as well. It's not just the family; it's the wider journey as well, the broader journey. Our connection to humanity, our soul consciousness with humanity's soul consciousness, our connectedness to everything, whether it's our pets, or whether it's the trees and the birds, and we realize that this is all part of that we're not separate from any. It's all just different densities that are here to give us an experience, and that I think becomes quite wondrous, I think, when you start to realize that.
Can you tell us about some of the stuff that you've done? I noticed that you had a lot of CDs out for meditation, and are they hypnosis CDs or?
Well, they're really meditations for healing, for opening up. So, the Inner Alchemy series were all about helping people to open up, to connect to that multidimensional side, maybe revisiting a past life, or it may be opening up to an activation of some kind, healing. So there's a whole range of different ones that I'd done on different levels for that. The main thing with what I was trying to do there is give people tools, because everyone says, oh, well, it's very hard. Most will say it's very hard to meditate as such. And if you're talking about meditation where you're supposed to clear your mind and not think of anything, there's very few people that take that very easily and find that very easy. But what is easier is if you give someone a journey to take, so that they've got something to focus on. And so all of mine were made to be easy. Everything, a child can do them. But what we did add was binaural beats to balance, left and right brain, trance-inducing frequencies, and the music was intuitive as well, and the wording. So everything was tied in to make it something that literally anyone can do, so that, you don't have it for only those that have meditated for the last 10 years or whatever and say, well, I can do that. Whereas most of us, need something to focus on. So everything came from hypnosis that, I learned to do. And that is really, for me, the way in to everything, including, our illness. The inner healer is one that I was particularly focused on, because we all can heal ourselves. And they just say, well, how do you do it? And it doesn't have to be hard. Nothing's hard when you've got some kind of little journey that anyone can do. And that's what I've tried to do, is make it simple.
So people can just, people don't know where to go. They just, I know what it was like when I first awakened and went into this. I got lost in the information, and I didn't know where to turn. And it took me a while to slowly piece it together.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of things we can do ourselves, including, all the healing stuff, once you've got some method to do it. If it's something very complex or very detailed, then obviously a facilitator is much better, when there are certain things that, because you can find yourself being overwhelmed if it's something really that's taking you into something really deep in yourself. But again, there's a lot that you can do for yourself. People don't realize that they have so much power within them, their own consciousness, and they just need to know how to access it,
I mean, I guess that's part of the training of being, looking to solve it externally. The way we're brought up, and we're still sort of half running those programs. So what advice would you give to someone who's just starting to become aware at the moment of what's going around in this and becoming open to spirituality?
That's a good question, Brooke. I'd say that if they're becoming aware, there's a part of them that is driving that, and that higher self or super conscious self that's driving that catalyst to become aware. And so it's, you know, I say to them, look, your soul knows where it's going. It's not going to let you miss the bus. So chill and just go where you feel your heart is taking you, because it's taking you where you need to go. There's so many that come to me saying, I feel like I should be doing something, or I don't know if I'm on a mission or if I'm on the right track, or all these things. And they get so worked up about it and saying, oh, you know, I need, you know, I want to know that. And I'm saying, look, your soul hasn't brought you here, worked this hard to get you to this point for you to suddenly not get it. I said, you can bet your bottom dollar, even if it pushes you against the wall and slaps you a bit, it's going to make sure you get it. So chill, because it will unfold if you give it a chance to. Because we, you know, sometimes we get in the way of ourselves. And if you just let it open up, the synchronicities will happen. Who you're meant to meet or come across, it will happen. Just be in the moment and trust that part of yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I relate to that, because when I first got into spirituality, I was still running my own program. Okay, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And it wasn't until I had to learn to just, yeah, as you say, be present and just be there when things unfold.
Yeah.
And it just takes so much pressure off. We put so much pressure on ourselves. I guess it's the old ways of doing things in the 3D.
Yeah.
We're just so accustomed to. It's just, it'd be quite alien coming into the spirituality.
Well, it's all we need is the desire to change or grow, and that is the message we're putting out into the you know, the field, and then it will start to just manifest, because that's the message we're putting out. I want to change. I want to grow. I want to be able to, you know, be all I can be, or whatever it is, and things will start to flow simply because you've put the frequency out there. So it doesn't, you know, everything doesn't have to be hard on this planet. You know, we think that everything has to be hard. We've got to work for it for a good 10 years and it's going to cost half a house, or it's this or that, you know, because that's the programming. Everything has to be hard. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. It actually doesn't, you know. Because I say to people when they say, you know, about all this stuff, and I say, look, nobody taught you how to breathe, did they? I said, you do that without even thinking. I said, so how about you just trust that you know, that you're going to get to the point you need to get to, because your soul is already guiding the journey. And it's exactly the same thing. It'll be as easy as breathing, because it will just happen.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Because there's always pressures around, and people, it just, you see around and people getting upset, just getting so worked up and upset this day and age about things that really aren't important.
Yeah.
And you're like, why are you worried? Why are you worried? You're worrying about that. You spent your whole day worrying about something that you can't help.
That's it.
And it's just no good.
No. Well, the thing is, it is about, you know, knowing the difference between what you can change and what you can't change.
Yeah.
You know, we've picked a very dramatic time in human history to incarnate, and I say to people, you know, you obviously didn't want to get bored down here, so you've chosen a really really fascinating time to be here. Well, you're here, and the thing is to remember is the soul comes in with everything it needs to deal with whatever is going to be faced with on this planet, because otherwise, I said, it would be stupid not to. I mean, your soul says, right, you're doing this, you're going to go into that environment, this is what you need, here you go. So you've got everything you need. So what are you worried about?
Yeah.
You know, it's all there. It's just that we've forgotten, and we are listening to everything out there that says you can't do anything, you're useless, you're hopeless, because that's the world that wants you to believe that, when in fact it's the absolute opposite to that.
Because when we know the truth, they can't control us.
That's right. Yeah. And they don't want us to get it. They don't want us to realize it.
Oh, that's brilliant. Did you want to quickly recap your books?
All I would say is thank you. All I would say with Awakening, anyone who thinks they're starting to have encounters or experiences, what I wrote in that book was all the questions that I was asked and what do I do? How do I know it's real? How do I know I'm not crazy? All those kind of things. What about my kids if they're having them? This kind of stuff. So all those questions, implants and missing pregnancy, all that kind of stuff was in Awakening, really to give people a manual to help them through their process, because there's not, where do you go? Who do you have help with? The New Human was a different slant on that as a sequel, because I'm bringing in the children's stories, and they're a lot more awake, and the teenagers and their understanding of what they're here for, including even the whole, I call the God chapter, where you've got two ministers of religion talking about how they had to expand their awareness of Christianity into reincarnation, into ET contact, and how they managed to do that. Medical doctor, how she was activated, but also with the ADHD and with all of those things. How do you help an ADHD or an Asperger's? What kind of things can help them so that they can be on this planet and manage this reality? So it's for parents and teachers and all those. So there's a lot of self-help stuff in there. So in essence, that's what they are. But if you have any queries at all, you've got my website now. I'll just Google my name, and I'm on Facebook as well. So I'm available and easy to contact.
Yep. And all your contacts and links are in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get hold of you, just go to the show notes. They're everywhere. That's what happens this day and age. No one's hard to find anymore, aren't they? Yeah. It's easy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It was absolutely wonderful to have you on. I learned so much, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers did. Thank you very much, Mary.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Brooke, and take care and have a wonderful evening.
Okay. So everyone, we'll see you next week. Bye. See you, Mary.